In just a few days, a Moscow-backed referendum that could decide the fate of Crimea will take place in the region. Many believe that Russia holds the power in the situation. Earlier, we spoke with Anton Fedyashin, the executive director at the Initiative for at American University here in Washington, and he spoke on what Russia's next steps could be after the referendum. First, I want to ask you about the Crimea referendum taking place later this week. Is this annex a done deal? Why even have a referendum if there's all this movement going on behind the scenes? There are these new reports of Russian planes only being allowed to land on Crimea.
Well, the referendum is a done deal in the sense that the referendum is going to go ahead. The annexation question is still an open one because there are two questions the referendum will decide. One of them is whether the population of the Crimea wants to go back to the Constitution of 1992, which means greater autonomy within Ukraine. And the second question, there are only two, is whether the Crimean population wants to join Russia. Once that decision is made, whichever way it will go, and almost everyone is predicting that the overwhelming part of the population will vote for movement towards Russia, then we will be in an interesting legal sort of environment where there will be different interpretations of what leaving Ukraine means. Does this mean, or will this mean, direct annexation and joining Russia, reunification, as it's actually phrased in the referendum, or will it mean some kind of independent but unrecognized status for the Crimea, sort of like Abkhazia and South Ossetia? And from Moscow's perspective, the interesting thing is that an independent, albeit unrecognized, status would actually be more favorable. It would create much quieter atmosphere internationally, and it will allow Russia to throw its weight around on the Crimea without sparking off a massive international conflict.
Well, and at this point, if that happens, who do you recognize? The Russian government doesn't recognize the people in place currently in Ukraine, and the West may not recognize whatever the outcome of this referendum in Crimea is. So from an international perspective, you're watching this. Who do you side with? Who do you recognize?
From the international perspective, what our experience over the past 20 years with self-determination versus territorial integrity has shown is that there is a tendency to selectively apply these principles, as we saw when the West recognized Kosovo in 2008, finally after 10 years of going back and forth with Russia, when the West recognized South Sudan, when it recognized East Timor earlier. There's an enormous amount of room to maneuver on this question. And so ultimately, boots on the ground and fait accomplis decide the outcome. And in this case, it's going to look good for the Crimeans if they vote for reunification with Russia, simply because Russian troops seem to be on the ground and they're right next to Russia. So that's the way it's going to go, de facto.
All right, Anton Fedyashin, we appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
Thank you for having me.